first up, we're going to be looking at the defending of Bissouma and Rice.
So no, this is just a general comparison of Bissouma and Rice in a tactical battle. And basically, why I think this is a key battle in the game is because they're both playing in the number 6 position, right? Arsenal and Spurs generally actually play fairly similarly, apart from Spurs like to have 2 inverted fullbacks. Arsenal generally have the 1 inverted fullback. But how they approach the play, how they build up, and how they kind of like to play their football is fairly similar. So a lot of the differences in the game is going to come down to a bit of individual quality, who has a bit more confidence in the midfield, who can beat players more than the opposition when it comes to their ball carrying ability. And why I think Bissouma versus Rice is so crucial to this game is they both play the number 6s for each respective teams, and they're going to be tasked with basically anchoring that midfield, with having the ability to open up space for better players like Odegaard or Maddison or whoever in the front line. And they're going to be tasked with basically shutting out the opposition with their ability to cover space and make tackles, interceptions. But if we can have Bissouma have that ball carrying ability in that central midfield, it's going to be like having an extra player in that final third, essentially. Whereas Rice, he's much more of an anchor. He doesn't get involved in that play up the pitch as much. And what Bissouma is so great at is he takes players out of the game when he has that ball carrying ability, and that could be a big difference. So if we're comparing some of the stats this season, why it's so crucial this season, the comparison. So if we look at we'll look at their possession first. Look at the possession. So this is Bissouma versus Rice this season on the pitch. Establishing what kind of a difference there is between the two. Progressive carries, Bissouma's got 19, Rice has got 8. Progressive carries into the final third, Bissouma 14, Rice 6. Progressive carries into the penalty area, Bissouma's got 6 and Rice has got 0. However, there is a caveat: the amount of times they get dispossessed, Bissouma 12, Rice 1. So what I'm seeing from this is Bissouma's taking a lot more risk. He's getting a lot more reward, but Rice is clearly a lot more controlled. He's making sure he's not losing possession. He's keeping control of the football and he's keeping possession for his team, which is allowing Arsenal to maintain a lot of control with the ball. But what I'm liking from Bissouma, which could be very vital in this game if it comes off, is that he's throwing caution to the wind when it comes to his ball carrying ability. He's willing to attack that space if he sees it in the final third. He's willing to go for it, basically. You saw that dribble he did against Sheffield United into the penalty area where he got a shot off. Rice wouldn't do that. He's going to be much deeper. He's going to be throwing risk. And if Bissouma can pull off that ball carrying ability he's been showing, that could be a big difference to opening up the space and being basically an element which Arsenal aren't anticipating.
And Rice just plays like a much more classic number 6 in the Arsenal system. He sits deep, he sprays the ball around, and he wins the ball back in the middle of the park. Bissouma does it completely different. I mean, he plays like Ange wants a number 6 to play, where he gets the ball, he's got that ball carrying ability, he's got that creative streak in him. But apart from that, he also kind of is very combative in the middle and likes to win the ball back time after time. But in terms of like the passing stats, what can you tell me on those?
So I think this is where maybe Rice shows his worth, because passing wise, if you bring up the stats, obviously you see key passes, Bissouma has a few more than Rice, but if you see progressive passes, it's very similar, but Rice is slightly more. But the progressive passes into the final third, Rice is quite a bit more than Bissouma. So I'm not saying it's still fairly tight. Obviously the carries, like Bissouma's way ahead of Rice. The passing's a bit more even, but this is where Rice maybe has a bit of an edge over Bissouma, where he's not going to be carrying the ball into the final third, but his passing into the final third is a bit more accurate, it's a bit crisper, and allows for a bit more control for Arsenal when it keeps things simple. And he's obviously, with his progressive passing, that's where he finds the likes of Odegaard or Havertz or Jesus dropping deep in the final third, and that's where they can pick up the ball and hurt you. So Rice, a lot of it is going to be, can we stop Rice playing those passes? But in my book, I think it's a lot harder to stop a player from like Bissouma using that ball carrying ability than it is to stop a player from Rice from using that passing ability in my book. But I would say Rice maybe has a slight edge over Bissouma when it comes to the passing.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to look at the dribbling and the ball carrying ability that Bissouma has done all season. It's just so difficult to get the ball off him. Like, if you think he's going left, he's going to go right. If you think he's going to go right, he's going to go left. I mean, it's so hard to read that. Whereas Rice, I mean, I don't think he's playing like He's playing good passes, obviously, as you can see by the stats, but I think we just got to block those passing lanes that Rice is going to make. And I think we can do that with the likes of Pape Matar, Bissouma, and even Maddison in the middle of the park, because Maddison has been so good off the ball so far this season. And I think if we can kind of block Rice out of the game, which I think is possible, then I think that will stand us in such good stead as the stats probably suggest.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you're in the midfield, right, and look, I'm not a professional footballer, but I'm just trying to use my logic. If you're squared up with a midfielder, right, and you know that you have to basically, I think it's a lot more difficult if you know this guy has the beating of you dribbling wise to try and stop him than it is to maybe know that I can't let this guy make a pass and try and stop him making progressive pass through you. But if you know he's going to beat you or he's going to try and take you on, that's going to be a lot more difficult to deal with, because if he beats you, you know there's all that space in behind that he's going to exploit. And then not only is he going to exploit that, but it draws attention from other players because he's beating you, he's taking you out of the game, and all of a sudden other defenders now have to cover that space and come towards him. You can't just leave Bissouma to do whatever he wants, and that's going to draw space and for other players. Whereas Rice is a better passer. He might be able to find some of their attacking players in space with more of his passing, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for Arsenal to stop Bissouma from dribbling than from Spurs stopping Rice from passing, I think.
No, absolutely spot on.
And then I think, go on.
In terms of the defending, though, the stats, I mean, does fare up fairly even, to be fair.
Yeah, so obviously a large part of the matchup isn't just going to be about on the ball. It's going to be about off the ball as well. How much can they stop the opposition from getting the possession in the final third, creating good quality chances? So tackles, Bissouma's way up on Rice. He nearly double the amount of tackles that Rice makes. You can argue that it's because Arsenal have more of the ball or something like that, and Arsenal do less defending than Spurs. But I think when I think it's a fairly even matchup when you look at this season. Tottenham by and large have been getting average over 65% possession. So I wouldn't say majority of the game we've been defending. So I wouldn't even say that Bissouma's been doing a lot more defending than Rice. I just genuinely think he's been making more tackles. Interceptions is fairly similar, but this stat here, dribblers tackle, that's when they're being taken on by a player and how often they're coming out on top when they're trying to be dribbled past. And Bissouma's a bit better than Rice when it comes to that, and I think that's going to be very significant when it comes to when Arsenal do try and take on Bissouma, try and dribble past him and try and open up the space that way. I think Bissouma's a lot harder to dribble past than Declan Rice is.
Yeah, and the amount of how press resistant Bissouma is, I think it's going to be difficult for Arsenal to handle Bissouma. I mean, how press resistant is Declan Rice?
I think he's press resistant in the sense that he rarely gives the ball away when he receives it. He very often is able to find a teammate and find a solution, but he's not press resistant in the same way that Bissouma is. So Bissouma can get the ball with someone on his back and he can spin them and exploit the space. Rice is more likely to find a little flick pass or pass it back to his defender and not give the ball away, and that allows you to keep possession, but he's not going to be like Bissouma where he's really exploiting the space in behind and actually committing players. So I think that's the big difference between how press resistant they are. I would say Rice is fairly press resistant. I wouldn't say he gives the ball away a lot, but he's not press resistant in an effective way that's going to get you up the pitch like Bissouma is.
So I think it's safe to say that Bissouma is going to be eating some rice on Sunday night. That's for sure.
Exactly.
He's going to have a nice little curry with some rice. But in terms of the next matchup, we're going to look at Maddison against Odegaard. So let's go through these stats.
Yeah, so obviously this is going to be another key matchup because these are two of the main creative hubs in both teams, and I think both players are going to during the game be able to find some joy in and around the penalty area. And it's going to be about who can make the most of what they have in possession, I think. And I actually envisage, as I said before, that Bissouma could the way he plays could open up more space for the likes of James Maddison than maybe Odegaard might get, but it's all going to be about what they can do on the pitch. So obviously this is the stats from this season. Key passes, Maddison 14-5. So he's been making a lot more key passes so far than Odegaard. Passes into the final third though, Odegaard slightly ahead, 27-26. Progressive passes, 57-46. And that shows that I think that's a consequence of Maddison coming a lot deeper and joining up the build-up play and getting involved in the midfield third, maybe a bit more involved than Odegaard, who's maybe staying a bit higher up the pitch than Maddison is in general, which makes it even more impressive that Maddison Maddison still getting these creative numbers even when coming deeper. Take-ons, Maddison completed 10 of his 17 attempts, Odegaard 8 of his 12. So Maddison attempts more, maybe gets dispossessed a bit more, but is got few more successful take-ons. But Odegaard seems a bit more effective when he does attempt to take on. Progressive passes received 41 to 34. So this stat I'll tell you why it's impressive, because if you marry the progressive passes stat with that stats, that means that Maddison is getting more involved in the build-up when he's in the middle third with the progressive passes, and when you see progressive passes received, he's actually picking up the ball in more dangerous areas more than Odegaard as well. So even though he's getting more involved in the build-up, he's still picking up the ball in dangerous areas just as much or more than Odegaard as well at the moment. So that's very impressive. Carries into the final third, 14 to 15, so very similar in when it comes to picking the ball up from deep and carrying it into that dangerous areas. Carries into the penalty area, dead even, 6 each, so they're fairly even on that. Shot creating actions, Maddison a bit ahead, 36 to 31. A shot creating action is an action, a dribble, a shot or a pass that leads to another shot. So Maddison slightly ahead on that. Shots on target this season, this is quite interesting. Maddison has had 11 of his 17 shots on target, Odegaard 11 of 25. So Maddison's been a lot more accurate when it comes to his ability in and around on goal, though Odegaard's had more shots. And expected assists, Maddison's had 1.2 to Odegaard 0.2.
That's actually mad.
So Maddison creating a lot better chances so far this season than Martin Odegaard, who's maybe not been at his creative best. So on this evidence, obviously it's a small sample size first 5 games of the season, but Maddison's, I feel like, been a lot more effective in when he's had the opportunities than Odegaard, and that could be a big difference when they get the opportunities on Sunday.
I mean, Maddison is just like performing out of his skin at the moment. He's the best player in the Premier League. He got Player of the Month in the first month, so I think those stats bear out how good he actually has been this season. And something else which we don't really speak about with Maddison a lot, where it's quite obvious what he's good at, is in terms of the set pieces. Like his set piece delivery is unbelievable. We saw it in the first game against Brentford, laying on that assist for our first goal, for Romero's goal. But as well, what we haven't seen from Maddison this season is his direct free kicks in terms of his shooting ability. We all saw last season that save that, I think it was Ramsdale against Maddison, that save that everyone goes on about from Ramsdale from that free kick.
Yeah.
I actually have had a vision while doing this show that Maddison is going to score a free kick at the Emirates this weekend.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here right first. So get your money on it, because I actually think like that is a big tool in our armory that we never speak about, is our direct free kicks. Because Maddison, apart from James Ward-Prowse, who's better than Maddison in free kicks in the Premier League?
De Bruyne is very good. Apart from him, Odegaard I've never really seen score. He scored 1 free kick, I remember, but not too many. I think he's probably up there when it comes to direct free kicks. Can't think of anyone off the top of my head who's much better than him, to be honest. He was very good for Leicester.
Harry Kane to hog the free kicks.
Exactly, that's also a big advantage. That's one thing he hasn't done yet. He scored from outside the box. He's laid on assists. He's scored a goal from inside the box. Just need to score a direct free kick now. It's the perfect start of the season. It's
coming this weekend, trust me.
But I think so that's going to be a very interesting matchup, because whoever gets on the ball more and who can do more with it is also going to be very, very telling as to who can come out on top in this game, I think.
As someone has reminded me in the comments, Trent Alexander-Arnold is also in the Premier League as well. So
there you go. Yeah, Trent's a very good
So let's bump him down one more. But still, he is still in probably the top 3 or 4 in the Premier League.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In terms of the next battle we're going to look at is the winger 1v1 battles, which is going to be an interesting look at.
Yeah, I think this is a really crucial battle in this game. Because as I said at the top of this video, Spurs and Arsenal like to play in a fairly similar way. We like to manipulate the pitch to isolate the opposition fullback so that our wingers can get one-on-one situations, and it's going to be about how often our wingers can beat the opposition fullback. Now, it's going to be interesting because we're going to have 2 teams doing that. So I think a lot of this game is going to be about, out of the 4 wingers, who can come out on top in their one-on-one situations more often and who can be creating the more chances. And that's going to be really crucial when it comes to getting the advantage in this game and getting joy when it comes to creating chances in the final third. Obviously, these stats I've got here, this is assuming Martinelli is going to play, but obviously at this point he might not. Trossard, I don't think, is as good when it comes to his one-on-one battles dribbling than Martinelli. But this is basically, I've taken the stats of Martinelli and Saka during this season for Arsenal, and this is the stats of Solomon and Kulusevski for Tottenham during this season. Obviously, a bit of a caveat that Solomon has only started 2 games, so you got a caveat that maybe if he would have started more of the games, then these stats might be higher. But I still think they make fairly impressive reading. I think the dribbling abilities of both sides. These are basically the take-ons attempted and completed this season. Arsenal have completed 20. The wingers, have completed 20 of their 42 take-ons. Spurs have completed 14 of their 31. And actually, a large part of that is actually Solomon, who's very impressively completed about 8 of his 14. Kulusevski's completed, I think, 6 of his 15 take-ons, so not as good. Bukayo Saka, though, he's the very impressive one. I think he's completed 11 of the take-ons for Arsenal. Martinelli completing the other 9, but there seems to be a bit more of an even split when it comes to take-ons. But that's obviously their biggest strength, is their wingers taking on their fullbacks and getting joy in those areas. I've done the take-ons per 90 because Solomon hasn't played that much football. So if you look at that, it's 1.6 for Arsenal, 1.2 for Spurs. So Arsenal definitely a bit better when it comes to the wingers taking on their fullbacks and Spurs. But when it comes to carries into the penalty area, so this is a winger's ability to get the ball and bring it into the penalty area and cause trouble in that way. Spurs slightly ahead, and 23 to 22. And actually, 17 of those 23 is Kulusevski, who actually tops the Premier League for carries in the penalty area. So that's a massive threat that he can bring, even though maybe when he's taking someone on, he's not as good as beating them, but he's very good at forcing the fullback backwards and into the penalty area and creating opportunities. Arsenal obviously still very good. Key passes, 22 to 21 in Arsenal's favour, albeit again, Solomon's only started 2 games and he's actually completed, I think it was 9 key passes in 2 games, which is very impressive. Kulusevski has got 12 key passes, so also quite a good total. But Arsenal as well, just slightly ahead with Saka, Martinelli. Shot creating actions, Spurs slightly ahead, 46 to 41, which is even more impressive considering Solomon has only started 2 games. The last stat I've got here as well, I think is quite crucial. And this is, I've taken the stats of White, Zinchenko, and Porro and Udogie, and this is how many times they've been able to tackle their opposition wingers when they've been dribbled at. And what I've actually noticed is Arsenal's fullbacks are not very good when it comes to tackling their dribblers. So White has only made 1 of 7 attempted tackles when it comes to dribblers, and Zinchenko's only attempted 2 tackles on dribblers and only got 1 of them. So he's not very good when it comes to tackling his fullback. Whereas you look at Spurs, we're actually quite strong, 11 of the 18, and Udogie has completed 4 of his 5 attempted tackles when against dribblers, and Pedro Porro has completed 7 of 13 when he's been taken on. So I guess my point is, when the Arsenal versus Spurs when it comes to dribbling are fairly even, but when it comes to the fullbacks, Spurs seem to have better fullbacks when it comes to being taken on dribbling, so that could be a big advantage in this game.
I'm surprised by that Ben White stat, to be honest, because I thought he was always a good one-on-one defender, to be honest. So I was kind of looking at it like saying we really need to target that left-hand side of Arsenal and get our best dribbler basically on the right hand side to target Zinchenko, because he sometimes does get lost in the middle of the park, and defensively he's not the best. And I noticed last season at the back end of the season when they were going for the title, Zinchenko let them down time and time again defensively, and I thought that was a real key area to target. But maybe we can carry that dual threat and target both sides.
We saw, obviously we don't have a player like Rashford, but you saw how Rashford gave him a really tough time when he played at the Emirates, didn't he? It wasn't just the goal, but there was a few instances as well where he was able to get to the byline and beat Ben White. So I think White...
Is that a case to play Sonny on the left then?
I don't know. I think the reason I'd keep Solomon there is I actually think Solomon's a better dribbler than Son. So I think I really want Son to be that threat centrally in behind, because if he gets a one-on-one, he's going to take it. And I think he's going to be looking for that one-on-one every time and for that pass in behind. So I think we got to keep him centrally. I don't want him out wide where he's going to be forced to create chances and beat players, where I'm sure he can get some joy, but I think where he's most effective is centrally, and I want him there in this game. So that's why I'd keep him there. And then Solomon, to be fair, the stats bear out that he's been very good at dribbling so far this season. So if he's going to start, I want to give him the opportunity to take on Ben White. So, but I think that's quite interesting, the fact that our defenders seem to be better when they're being taken on by wingers than their defenders. And that could, as much as their dribblers might be better dribblers than our wingers, the fact that our defenders might be better could be the difference as well.
Yeah, and imagine like we do start off with what we've played so far, like the options off the bench we can have with Richarlison, who came on and made a massive difference against Sheffield United, and Brennan Johnson as well. When he came on against Sheffield United, he looked so sharp, didn't he? He was getting in behind, he got a shot off, lovely finish for the offside goal as well, which was just offside. So I mean, we got really good options to come off the bench. I mean, do Arsenal have like those same options in the attacking areas?
To come off the bench, they've got I guess Nketiah, they've got maybe Fabio Vera or Havertz to come on. Obviously Trossard looks like he's going to start, but obviously he would have been an option to come on. Maybe Reece Nelson. So they do have options attacking, but I think looking at Richarlison to come on, Brennan Johnson, look, I wouldn't say it's much better than Arsenal, but I would say I'm pretty happy with our options to come off the bench for sure.
Yeah, and the next stat we're going to look at is the ball carrying ability of the both sides. So what can you tell me on that?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to these games, I think hopefully this game is going to be quite helter-skelter and quite open. But sometimes in these games, to open up space, you need your players to have the confidence to, when they do see a bit of space and when they do have the ability to take on an opposition, they go for it and they don't shirk their responsibility of doing that. And I think that's been a massive difference this season from Spurs to last season, is that even in deep situations when Spurs have the ball, last season, right, what was our game plan when we were building up? We did do, people forget last season, we did try and play out the back last season. It wasn't just going long, but what we did was we had a very strict structure on how we played out the back. We passed it to this player, who passed it here, who passed out wide, who tried to carry the ball forward, and then we tried to create a situation.
That's why Bissouma was essentially anonymous last season.
Correct. This season's been a lot different. It's been about we play out the back, but it's not about passing out the back. It's actually a lot of it is about dribbling out the back and finding that space and committing players in that way. And when you dribble, and when you get past the player using that space, what it does is it opens up the space across the pitch, because when you've taken a player out of the game, it forces other players to react to that, and it commits other players to try and stop the dribbler who's on the ball, and that opens up the space all around the pitch. So that is a very good strategy when it comes to trying to open up low blocks or open up a defence, when you've got really good dribblers on the pitch who can really commit other players and draw them out of positions and open up the space for your attackers to exploit. And now I'm looking at the ball carrying ability of Spurs compared to Arsenal this season. So progressive carries, Spurs way ahead, 164 for Spurs, 123 for Arsenal. Carries into the final third, crucial, 109 to Spurs, 81 to Arsenal. Carries into the penalty area, 59 to Spurs and 37 to Arsenal. And this stat I think is the most crucial. Take-ons during the game, Spurs completing 72 of 141 and Arsenal completing 47 out of 102. So obviously in terms of ratios, it's fairly similar, albeit I think Spurs are ahead. But the amount of take-ons we're attempting and forcing situations and looking to throw caution to the wind and looking to exploit space, that could be a massive difference. Because as we said, Arsenal have looked to maintain control this season through a bit more passing, a bit more of a, not say passive approach, but controlled approach, just trying to pass their way through teams, being very patient. Whereas Spurs, when they get the ball, if they see an opportunity to dribble and attack the space and use their ball carrying ability, they are taking it at the moment. If we can use that confidence in this game, that's going to cause problems for Arsenal, which I'm not sure how they can combat that, because if you've got a dribbler who can just dribble past you and you have no answer to that, how do you tactically go about stopping that, apart from maybe getting more players behind the ball and committing more players to stopping the dribblers? If you're in a one-on-one battle and your opposition is consistently beating you in a dribble, it's very difficult tactically to stop that unless you're going to restructure the team to be a bit more pragmatic. So this stat, the amount of take-ons we complete, could be very crucial when it comes to coming out on top in this game, and maintaining control.
And if we can because Arsenal will leave us a lot of space. They will. We know that for a fact. And we've been very good at exploiting space so far this season. So that's kind of what gives me a lot of confidence coming into this game. Maybe not to win the game, but definitely to create chances and to score goals. And I think it's just going to be such an intense, high octane game this weekend. And I think all the stats that we're kind of bringing up today is kind of highlighting that even more, to be honest.
Yeah, I didn't bring up the passing stats, but if I did look at the passing stats, like progressive passes into the final third, all that kind of stuff, Arsenal actually lead in those stats. But I actually think the ability to ball carry it's much more difficult to not to teach it, but if you can pull that off, it's a lot harder to stop than stopping passes into the final third. If you've got dribblers dribbling you from all angles, you give it to Udogie, he can dribble, Bissouma can dribble, Maddison can dribble, Solomon can dribble. If you've got all these players who are able to take on their men 1v1 and are confident to do so, that's a lot more difficult to stop than having a structure that Arsenal will have where they're able to pass the ball into the final third. Not saying that's easy to stop, but I think dribbling is harder to stop if they get that right.
In terms of exploiting the high line, this is fairly similar stats so far. Tottenham 17, Arsenal 15.
This is just through balls, yeah. There was not too many stats to back up. It's not about necessarily backing up my claim that Spurs are going to exploit the high line more, but I guess the point was that whoever can exploit the high line more it's going to be very crucial to creating the chances, because Van de Ven and Romero are going to step up. Saliba and Gabriel are going to step up. Spurs obviously attempt slightly more through balls than Arsenal. When it comes to long passes, I think Arsenal are slightly ahead when it comes to accuracy of long passes, but that's not necessarily about breaking a high line. That's a bit different. That's about more switches of play and stuff like that. So I think through balls is definitely a crucial element, very even when it comes to. But what I would say is when it comes to exploiting a high line, I do think I think the difference between Spurs and Arsenal when it comes to exploiting a high line is definitely going to be Son and Jesus, because Jesus isn't the kind of player who likes to run in behind as much. He definitely likes the ball to feet. He's a bit of a false number 9, but what that does is he's a great dribbler, but what that does is when he picks the ball up from deep, Martinelli and Saka will run in behind, where they would make those inverted runs, and then they will be the ones trying to exploit that space, whereas Son is going to be the one stretching in behind. He's going to constantly be looking for those runs in behind from off Saliba and Gabriel. So it's going to be very interesting to see the dynamic, who gets more joy. Is it going to be Son running in behind, or is it going to be Gabriel Jesus coming deep and maybe finding Martinelli or Trossard or Saka in behind as well? So I think whoever can get more joy exploiting the high line as well and creating those chances that way, that's going to be a very interesting tactical battle.
Well, I think there are a lot of key tactical battles to go into this weekend. Like I said, I think it's going to be an absolutely unbelievable game of football. The North London derby, it always is a lot of excitement going into it. But I think this year is a bit more than most, because like Spurs are going into it in such good form. The stats back that up as well, the underlying stats, as well as Arsenal. You know, they've started the season well in their own right as well. So I think it's going to be an insane game, key battles, and we'll have to see how it plays out on the day. But those are the kind of key areas that we've picked out on the pitch where what could make the difference on Sunday.